was one more gentleman, I'm not sure if he went way through.
He
yeah.
had to go pick up his kids from the airport.
Yeah. So welcome back, everybody. Hopefully we're feeling good and we're not too freezing. I know we just turned the air on. Really happy to be here today. It's also really awesome that I'm going after Jamie because he really set up the foundation for, what is a keto diet, what is a paleo diet. And so in my talk, I'm going to spend more time discussing how nutrition can have a profound impact on your mental health. So my name is Holly Higgins. I am a nutritional therapy practitioner certified by the Nutritional Therapy Association. Other NTPs you might know of out there in the world are Liz Wolfe of Real Food Liz. She wrote a book called Eat the Yolks. Nora Gudgaudas of Primal Body, Primal Mind. She's awesome. Noel Tarr of Coconuts and Kettlebells. There's a lot of movers and shakers out there who are NTPs. Essentially, we're schooled on the physiology and the function of the body and how to optimize health through a whole foods-based ancestral type diet. So my particular focus is I specialize in functional nutrition for mental health. So that's depression, anxiety, really any kind of quote-unquote mood disorder. You can make dramatic headway with it by changing the way that you eat. And very, very few people are talking about this right now, and it's something that I feel extremely passionate about. So what exactly is functional nutrition, and how is it different from just going to a dietitian who will give you a sheet of, have half of this diet soda and just don't go overboard on your Twinkies. So functional nutrition, we look as the body as a whole rather than a vessel of separate parts. So when I'm evaluating a client, I'm not just looking at what's on their plate. I'm looking at what's on their plate, how does that impact their digestion, their blood sugar, their hormonal balance. I look at the entire body. I look at their entire lifestyle. I look at them as an entire whole person, and I say, what can we change to make things better? So it's foundational. So there are basic foundational pillars to human health, and we take those into consideration when we're looking at anything. It's systems-based, so again, we're looking at the entire body rather than just separating it out into you have a mental health problem, it's in your brain, something's wrong with your brain. No, we look at the entire body and say, how is that impacting your brain? How is that impacting your moods? And it's holistic, so it's not just the food, it's not just the physiology of your body, it's what's going on in your life, how are you talking to yourself, what are your stress levels like? So we really look at the whole person. It always asks why. We're always asking why and digging deeper to figure out that root cause. So the tools that I work with, a whole foods-based diet, lifestyle changes, and targeted supplementation. And I'm going to introduce you later to a woman named Kelly Brogan. She's a psychiatrist, and I'll talk more about her later. But I love this quote from her. The body is an intricately woven spider web. When you yank one area of it, the whole thing moves. And that really speaks to what nutrition can do for you. So a little bit more about me and a little bit of a disclaimer about me. While I am certified by the Nutritional Therapy Association and I can speak to you about nutrition, it's interesting that I specialize in mental health because I'm not a licensed mental health practitioner. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychiatrist. I cannot advise people regarding psychiatric medication. It's not within my scope of practice. I can point people to resources and guides and tools that they can then share with their mental health care practitioners, but I myself cannot do that. Another thing that I really want to stress is that I don't believe in medication shaming. In the natural health world, there can kind of be this stigma. If you're taking a natural approach to your lifestyle, it's like, medication is the devil, and I don't advocate that, and nobody should ever be on medication. And I don't believe in that. I think especially when it comes to mental health, I think it's a very, very personal decision, and I don't believe in shaming anybody or telling anybody what they should do. My real passion is telling people, hey, you can make leaps and bounds of improvement with dietary changes. So I just want to make that very clear. So my approach to mental health, as I've said, is I view it through the lens of nutrition and mindset. And that's what I talk to people about mostly. So I just want to share a little bit of something with you. I love this meme up here of like stock photos and when your salad keeps making jokes. It's funny. Before I got into nutrition, I was very skeptical of health nuts. And I would call myself today a health nut. Like, I'm definitely a health nut. But before I got into nutrition, I thought health nuts were like these aliens and they had it all figured out and like nothing was ever hard for them. And, you know, I could never be like them. They'd always been healthy and they didn't know what it was like to be me. And I really saw them as like these otherworldly alien type people, like super weirdos. And, you know, I just assumed that everybody who was a health nut came out of the world like, this is how they came into the world. That's baby Jamie. No.
I did get a weight set at a really early age, though. Great.
But as it turns out, most health nuts, this isn't how they come into the world. Most health nuts actually, they have a story of transformation and they've been through a lot of struggle, myself included. And I want to share my story and my struggle with you today, not to sit up here and to blabber on about myself because I'm so awesome, but because I think it's so important when we're going through any kind of struggle or we have any kind of goal for ourselves. You know, maybe you guys in here, maybe mental health isn't impacting you. Maybe you're doing just fine. I guarantee you it impacts somebody that you know. But I'm sure everybody in here has a goal of some sort, whether that's fitness or a goal in your personal life. And finding role models and finding people who have walked through the fire and seeing how they've transformed can give you so much hope for what you can do for yourself. And I love this quote by Brené Brown. If we share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. So the more people who talk about what's really going on, the more the stigma falls apart. So, my story. From a very young age, I always struggled with depression and anxiety. I would say like even before I was 10, I just kind of had a low mood. I didn't feel that great. I had a pretty rough childhood, which also contributed to it. But for most of my life, it was manageable. I could deal with it. I could hide it. I could pretend like everything was okay. You know, I went to school. I made good grades. I went to college. I did fine, but there was always kind of this subtle undercurrent of just meh, you know. But then when I was 25, I moved to Michigan. I'd say it was a pretty stressful year. We just gotten married. There were a couple other like job changes and stuff going on that I think added to my stress load, but I really started feeling very, very, very bad. It got to the point to where I couldn't get out of bed. I was drinking a bottle of wine every day. I had really intense anxiety that I felt in my body. I spent all of the time in the past ruminating on everything. I would go to the grocery store and I would be convinced that everybody in the grocery store hated my guts. They were complete strangers, but in my mind, everybody hated me and they wanted me out of there. I felt like a fraud. I had outbursts of rage. I was very, very obsessed with certain things. Basically, I got to a really, really, really nasty point and I felt like my life was ending. So I did what you do when you have really bad challenges like that. And I went to a therapist and I started talking about it. And she said, well, you know, you're really bad. I think you need to go see a psychiatrist. So I went to a psychiatrist also. And I was diagnosed with a myriad of things. On the left here are all of the things that I was officially diagnosed with. It was really interesting because the therapist and the psychiatrist kept disagreeing on the diagnoses, and it was really interesting. And then on the right-hand side are all of the medications I experimented with over the course of trying this conventional approach to mental health. Going through that, being diagnosed with certain things, on the one hand, it was comforting because it made me feel like I wasn't crazy. It's like, okay, a person in a white coat with degrees from prestigious schools says, this is what's wrong with you, and you know, this happens to certain people, and this is your diagnosis, and here's how we're going to fix it. That's very comforting in a weird way, because it's like, finally I know why I feel like this. But on the other hand, it was also condemning, because I was being told I was going to have to be on medications for the rest of my life. This was always going to affect me. I was always going to carry these problems around. And so it also felt kind of like a sentence of sorts. So basically, I started off way down here. Through therapy and medication, I did feel a little bit better. But then I'd hit a plateau and I'd go back down, and I'd have to up my meds. And then I'd feel a little bit better and I'd hit a plateau and I'd have to up my meds. Eventually, I was on very, very high doses of mood stabilizers and SSRIs, antidepressants essentially, a cocktail of all sorts of different things. And while I wasn't at the point anymore where I felt like the world was going to end, I had emotionally flatlined. I felt like a zombie. I was never really happy and I was never really sad. I had just kind of reached this place of, once again, meh. And a very, very common side effect of SSRIs is weight gain. Over the course of a year and a half, I put on 60 pounds. I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't really educated about the fact that that would happen. So I had this other thing to be depressed about. It's like, hey, now you're obese, So eventually I ended up at this place where I didn't feel like myself. Another thing about me is that I work in the creative industry. I work in advertising as a writer. And my creativity was shot. So I was like, am I going to lose my job because I can't think of anything cool anymore? So I ended up at this place, obese, flatlined, didn't recognize myself. And I made a decision that I was going to do whatever it took to get healthy. So I started looking at alternative things that I could do. And here are some pictures of me when I was at my heaviest. Let's see. So I decided I wanted to get off medication. So I worked with my doctor, and if you are on medication, you have to work with a physician to get off medication. It can be very, very tricky. There are psychiatrists coming out now and saying that these drugs are harder to get off of than heroin and prescription pain meds. And they don't tell you that when they prescribe those to you, and it's very, very difficult to get off them. The withdrawal effects were horrible, but I did get off of them over the course of several months. And then my main concern at that point was, well, how do I lose this weight? Like, now I'm just really heavy and I don't like this, and I want to get back to a healthy weight. So I tried everything. I did the calorie counting. I did the gym rat thing. I spun my wheels. And eventually I came across a program called Whole30, which a lot of you in here have probably heard of because it's gotten really big. And it's a really awesome program. It's basically a paleo template, but it's pretty reined in. You can't have any sweeteners. They're really, really picky about additives and stuff. But it's a 30-day paleo reset diet. And so I said, okay, I want to lose weight. I'm going to try this. So I did the Whole30, and it was the first thing I did that helped me lose weight. So I got to the end of the month. I had lost 6 pounds. Yay, that's awesome. But I also noticed for the first time in my entire life, I felt happy. And I thought, whoa, this is really cool. Like what's going on here? And so I kept eating that way, and I became obsessed with the connection between nutrition and mental health. I said, there's really something to this. So I started researching it, and what do you know? Yes, there is a connection, and there are a few people out there talking about it. So I decided to go back to school for it, was when I enrolled in the Nutritional Therapy Association. And now I'm out here spreading the message of what helped me. So that's kind of my journey to how I got here. Here are some after pictures, so you can see the contrast between where I was and where I am today. Along my journey and my research, I came across a woman by the name of Brogan. She's a psychiatrist. She just wrote a book called called A Mind of Your Own, The Truth About Depression and How Women Can Heal Their Bodies to Reclaim Their Lives. So this woman is probably the smartest person ever. She has an MD from Cornell University. She did her fellowship at NYU. She has an MA in cognitive neuroscience from MIT, and she has a private practice based in NYC. And she was trained in the traditional psychiatric model, but she found in her practice that her patients weren't improving, and if anything, they were getting worse. So she did a lot of research, and where she's at today is she uses a completely diet and lifestyle-based approach to mental health, and she has a phenomenal success rate in her practice. And I love this quote from her: "The best way to heal our brains is to heal the bodies in which they reside." And that's really kind of the foundation of my entire talk today. I'm just gonna get a sip of water. So when we're looking at mental health issues, whatever they might be, there's a psychological side and there's a physiological side. And what I mean by psychological is more of brain-based and physiological is body-based. Another quote: "Depression can result from bodily imbalance rather than brain chemical imbalance." So we're all really familiar with the physiological kind of root causes of depression, anxiety, other mental health issues. There's the widespread theory of chemical imbalance, which there is actually a lot of research out there now that's starting to debunk that. There's childhood trauma or any sort of trauma, abuse, neglect, constant negative self-talk or negative self-image, or just a life that doesn't align with your values can cause you to have mental health issues. But what not many people are talking about is there are body-based reasons that people experience mental health issues. Those are things like blood sugar imbalance, digestive issues, nutrient and mineral deficiencies, thyroid problems, genetic mutations, and toxic overload. And that's not a comprehensive list, but that'll just give you an idea of all of these things that can be causing these issues. But most healthcare practitioners, if you go in with any sort of mental health complaint, they're not asking these questions. Again, I want to stress that I don't believe in medication shaming, but I do think it's important for people to know the facts about where we're at with antidepressants in America. 1 in 7 women in America is on an antidepressant. 1 in 4 women in their 40s and 50s, that's 25%. 11% of all Americans. And from 1998 to 2008, there's been a 400% increase in usage and prescribing. What's interesting with that figure, if you look below it, direct-to-consumer advertising has increased from 1.3 to 4.8 billion. So there's a direct correlation between the advertising and the prescribing, which is really interesting, to say the least. So the heart of my talk today is I want to talk about the big 5 ways that your diet could be sabotaging your mood. So we'll start with a biggie: low protein, low fat diets. We could also say poor protein or poor fat diets. Poor fats like industrial oils, vegetable oils, margarine, etc. Poor protein, I think if you're getting the majority of your proteins from like tofu or soy, I don't believe that that's the most healthy option. So when we're looking at quality proteins, we're talking about things like wild-caught seafood, grass-fed meats, pasture-raised animals, and then healthy fats, healthy saturated fats like lard, tallow, avocado oil, coconut oil, those sorts of things. So if we look at the role of fat in mental health, we need fat to make all of our hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. All of our hormones are built on fat, and we see the world through the lens of our hormones. So if we have hormonal problems, it's a given that we're going to have mood problems. And it's really interesting. Our brain is 60% fat, and it contains 25% of the cholesterol in our entire body. So our brain loves fat. And then if we look at proteins, proteins are actually the precursors for amino acids. So when we eat and digest protein, the protein is broken down into amino acids. Amino acids are the precursors for neurotransmitters, which are to put it simply, the brain chemicals that drive our mood. So if we have a lack of protein, or if we have poor proteins, or if we're not breaking down our proteins appropriately, that can lead to neurotransmitter imbalances, which can then in turn lead to mood issues. Another thing that I like to stress with healthy proteins and meats from appropriately raised animals is that they have a lot of bioavailable vitamin B. B vitamins are really crucial for mental health as well. Fats also, here we are back to inflammation. I know Jamie talked a lot about it, and I'm going to be talking a lot about it too. We need fats to manage our natural inflammatory processes. So if we have a lack of fats, or if we're feeding ourselves poor fats, that can lead to chronic inflammation. And then again, low protein, low fat diets by nature, because you have to always have those 3 macronutrients in some sort of balance. If we're low protein or low fat, we're going to naturally be high carbohydrate, and high carbohydrate diets lead to blood sugar issues, which lead to chronic inflammation. So next we're going to be talking about blood sugar dysregulation. Another thing that I really didn't understand before I studied nutrition was that even if you're not diabetic or pre-diabetic, everybody has blood sugar, and everybody is interacting with their blood sugar in some way or another. You know, we've all experienced that feeling of being hangry, like, oh my God, I crashed, feed me now, I'm dying. And the symptoms we get are being jittery, anxious, headachy, nauseous, irritable, edgy, moody, tired, foggy, that sort of bonking feeling that Jamie was talking about. So normal blood sugar, if it's balanced, follows this kind of gentle wave, and we never bonk, and we're always at a steady state, and we have consistent energy. If we're eating a lot of sugar, pretty quickly we'll get into what's called reactive hypoglycemia, where you eat a sugar or carb heavy meal, your blood sugar spikes, insulin drives it back down, you're bonking, you need something to pick you up, you go grab a Frappuccino, you're back up here, insulin freaks out, and you're back down here, and all day long you're on this roller coaster. But so many people are so out of touch with their bodies that they don't realize that that's tied to food. It's kind of crazy, but this blood sugar roller coaster mimics psychiatric symptoms. And a lot of people assume that they're crazy, or they assume they have something wrong with them, when really they just have imbalanced blood sugar. And Dr. Brogan calls it the great psychiatric pretender, and says that one of the most influential risk factors for depression is high blood sugar. So sugar consumption. In 1821, we were eating about 10 pounds a year. And in 2010, we're eating about 196 pounds per year, which if you hear those numbers, that sounds so staggering. And oh my gosh, how are we eating 196 pounds of sugar per year? But if you look at it, in light of the context of today's diets, it doesn't really seem, I don't know, it doesn't add up. Because most of these foods listed here with the sugar content, most people would call these sensible choices and little indulgences. You know, aside from the Coke and the Oreos and maybe the Frappuccino, a lot of people would identify the rest of the foods on there as healthy foods. But then you add all of those things up over the course of a day, which is not a stretch for most people, and you land at 227 grams of sugar. So it's really eye-opening. Other things about, oh, go ahead.
Just go back to that slide.
Yeah.
Does anybody know how many grams of sugar you hold at a blood level on average? Very bottom thing there. 5 grams. 5 to 7. Just for a point of reference.
Yeah. And historically, the body never had to deal with blood sugar emergencies, but today's diets, the body really does perceive these elevations of blood sugar as an emergency, which is why insulin is so gung-ho on getting that sugar back down and driving it into your cells. So thanks for that reference, Jamie. That's awesome. Other things about blood sugar dysregulation, they really, I don't want to get into the science of this because it gets really complicated, but they really, really stress our adrenal glands. And over time, when the adrenal glands are constantly stressed, that can lead to more severe health challenges. It can lead to what's colloquially known as adrenal fatigue, and can also kind of be the root cause of pretty severe thyroid issues. Blood sugar swings also deplete B vitamins and minerals, which also happen to be really crucial for mental health. And this is an interesting fact over here. For every molecule of sugar we eat, we need 54 molecules of magnesium to process it. So when we're eating all of that sugar, we're burning through our minerals, we're burning through our B vitamins, and those are two of the biggest nutritional components that we need for mental health. And blood sugar imbalances are a leading cause of chronic inflammation. So the next thing we're going to talk about is food sensitivities. Food allergies and sensitivities can present as psychiatric symptoms. I cannot eat gluten or I basically have a panic attack. And I didn't know that before doing the Whole30 elimination diet and changing my lifestyle. You may not even know that food is causing these symptoms because we just don't tend to think that foods can cause psychiatric symptoms. Most common food allergies out there are gluten, dairy, nuts, eggs, and nightshades. Most people will find great success in eliminating the first two. If you do eliminate the first two and you find that you're still having issues, especially digestive issues, and you might suspect more sensitivities, the last three things are something you might look at eliminating later through something called the autoimmune paleo protocol is something that you can look at. And when we're constantly exposed to these foods that our body is having a immune reaction against, that leads to leaky gut, which Jamie talked about, where the junctions and the joints of our intestines, they start letting particles of food through, and our immune system tags that as an invader, and that leads to chronic inflammation. Are we noticing a pattern? The next thing that I want to talk about, which is, it's kind of at the seat of all of this, and I could have an entire presentation devoted entirely to gut health and mental health, but I want to cover more here, so I'm not going to go into a ton of depth today, is gut health and digestion. Instinctively, we know that mental health and gut health are correlated, and we even have language to talk about this. We say, oh, I have butterflies in my stomach when I'm nervous, or something really emotional happened to me and I lost my appetite, or I get an upset stomach whenever I have to give a presentation or whatever. Instinctively, we know that, but I think a lot of people still haven't really made that connection. Our brain is directly connected to our gut via the vagus nerve, and you can see kind of a crude illustration of that here. They are physiologically, there is a direct connection between them. That relationship is huge, and the research on this is exploding right now. I really think we're entering a new frontier of health and a new frontier of information, especially when it comes to the microbiome. The microbiome is our good and bad. It's the bacteria that makes up our gut, and we also have bacteria all over our bodies, which is collectively referred to as the microbiome. That in and of itself is like a whole nother talk, but I'll just let you guys know that it's extremely important. And one of the ways that you can promote a healthy microbiome is to eat naturally fermented foods. So I have a picture of the brinery. It's a great local fermented sauerkraut and other fermented foods. Those have naturally occurring probiotics in them. You can also supplement with probiotics, but most of the probiotics out there on the market are complete trash. There's 2 brands that I highly recommend, and you can ask me about those afterward if you're interested. Probiotics are huge if you have mood, digestive, or immune allergy issues, because those bacteria actually help manage all of those processes within our body.
So would that be anyone, pickles, anything like that?
Yeah, as long as it is, kimchi, pickles, sauerkraut. I know the diet that we've talked about today is kind of anti-dairy, but if you can tolerate dairy, a great like yogurt or kefir has a lot of naturally occurring probiotics. But most sauerkraut and pickles that's sold at the store is just brined in vinegar. It's not actually fermented. So you always want to buy it in the refrigerated section of your store. And usually it'll say like naturally fermented, or this is a living food, or something of the sort on the label. But if you're local, I highly recommend the brinery because they're awesome. Just to kind of illustrate for you how explosive the science is right now, just in 2015, we discovered that the brain has its own lymphatic system. That was last year. And this lymphatic system connects it to the rest of our immune system. Where is most of the immune system housed? 80% of it resides in our gut. So again, there we're going back to that gut-brain connection. The brain is connected to the gut. The brain has an immune system. Most of the immune system is in our gut. There's this direct two-way path there. Also really interesting, 90% of our serotonin, which is the feel-good mood chemical, to put it crudely, 90% of that is actually manufactured in our gut, not in our brain. It's kind of, when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's so cool.
Just so you guys know, this number 4, this gut and health thing, is going to be big and real soon. I get to travel all over the world and go to these seminars, and this is a huge topic of discussion right now.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just with mental health, it's with any kind of autoimmune issue and inflammatory diseases. Hippocrates, way back in the day, I forget the exact quote, but he said something like, all disease begins in the gut, is a very famous quote of Hippocrates. He said that way back in the day, and it's taken us all the way till now to actually listen to him. So that's huge, and again, we're just dipping our toe in today, but there's a lot of great books out there on this and a lot of papers that you can look up. It's a really cool area of study. And I'm going to talk. Get her done.
This commercial drives me up the wall.
So another thing that I want to talk about with digestive health, this tends to blow people out of the water, is the stomach acid myth. So most people, when they complain of heartburn and they go to their doctor, they say, oh, you have too much stomach acid. Here's an acid blocker, or here's a proton pump inhibitor. Here's a Prilosec OTC. And they're treating the symptoms, but they're not treating the root cause. Actually, the root cause of heartburn is too little stomach acid. And that seems really counterintuitive. But what's going on, if you see your stomach right up there in the corner, your stomach contains hydrochloric acid, and that's what breaks down your food, especially your proteins. Ideally, that needs to be at a pH of 1.5 to 3 to appropriately break down and digest your food. Most people have low stomach acid, and one of the biggest causes of that is just stress. Most people today are dealing with what we call hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid, especially people with mental health systems. I know I have major hypochlorhydria, I found out. And the actual real treatment for that is to boost stomach acid through supplementation until your stomach is retrained to make the appropriate amount of acid. But you're still like, wait, okay, why do we have heartburn? When you eat food and it goes into your stomach and the stomach acid isn't powerful enough, eventually it just kind of sits there and it ferments and it bubbles up to the esophagus right there. And that's where the acid is then touching your esophagus and you get that burning sensation. So it's really interesting. My understanding of digestion before I studied nutrition was probably like Larry the Cable Guy's. I was just kind of like, well, you eat and it goes into a bucket and it comes out the other end if everything's going right. But actually digestion is this really interesting chemical process of like these domino effects of like this has to happen in order for this to happen, and it's really this biochemical orchestra of amazingness. So if we have low stomach acid, if we're not appropriately digesting our food, and then it then goes into the small intestine and it's not appropriately broken down, this causes irritation and results in chronic inflammation. So wrapping it up, number 5, chronic inflammation. As I've hammered in, it all ties back to chronic inflammation. And even in the mainstream model of studying mood disorders, this is starting to be recognized. It's called the cytokine model of depression, or the inflammatory model of depression. As I said, it's becoming more and more mainstream. I just pulled a few headlines. I quickly Googled Psychology Today, a couple of other, I think one of those is pulled from the journal Nature. This is really rising up, and we're really going to see this come to prominence. But it takes a long time for things like this to truly break through to the mainstream. I think I read a figure somewhere that like when a paper comes out, it takes 20 years for it to actually make it into quote unquote evidence-based medicine. So it's on the rise, it's a thing, it's really exciting because we're finally starting to understand the true physiological causes of mood disorders. And just something I want to point out about inflammation, we all know like the inflammation that comes when we sprain our elbow or cut our knee. Chronic inflammation is different than that, and Dr. Brogan's quote here illustrates that really nicely. Unlike the inflammation that follows bruising your arm or skinning your knee, this more silent, ongoing inflammation deep inside has a meaningful connection to your mental health. And not only in your mental health, but other, inflammatory conditions, basically any kind of disease, inflammation is usually at the root of it. So, holy inflammation, Batman, what can you do? I put this in here because I know that Jamie likes Batman. So, like I said, it's really great that Jamie went ahead and gave his presentation because that already gives us a foundation, and I don't need to stand up here and dive into the nitty-gritty of it with you. You guys have some awesome handouts. There's also a lot of really awesome resources out there now for understanding paleo and ketogenic diets. But in terms of mental health, it's my opinion that these two diets are the most therapeutic options. Now, I started out with the paleo diet with the Whole30. I did that for about 2 years, and I had awesome success with it. But over the course of my medication treatment and such, I became very metabolically damaged. So I am now a very insulin-resistant person. So I decided to give ketogenic a try in combination with paleo, and I've had awesome success with that. I've busted through a weight loss plateau. I've had more mental clarity. That approach has been really, really effective for me. I'm not dogmatic, and I don't necessarily think that everybody has to be keto paleo. I think you have to tweak things and find what works for you. But as I said, if you do have a lot of metabolic damage, if you do have a lot of trouble losing your weight, ketogenic is definitely worth giving a try. And then in mental health, it's extremely important to emphasize those fermented foods that we talked about, and both saturated and unsaturated fats. Fats are crucial in management of mental health. So, I'm not going to run through these again because Jamie did an awesome job with that, explaining the ketogenic and paleo diets and in those sheets outside that you can grab, talk through this. And if you have any questions or, want to pick my brain about more details after the presentation, just come up to me. I'd be more than happy to walk you through any of this. Another thing that's really great for mental health issues is targeted supplementation, especially if you're down in a pit or you've maybe recently tapered off medication and you're trying to bolster yourself back up to a kind of baseline level. With supplementation, it's always great to work with a practitioner. As Jamie said, you don't just want to blindly throw supplements at everything and hope that it works, because you can actually do more harm than good in some cases. Also, just going and buying a supplement at Meijer, there is rampant adulteration in the supplement industry. There's been like undercover studies done where they go in and they look at this, echinacea, and it's like wheat flour. Like that kind of stuff is being done, and it's really scary. So I always recommend, buying high quality practitioner grade supplements because they're very stringent about the quality and the criteria and the allergens in those. Don't want to dive into any of these too in depth, but supplements that can be really helpful for mental health issues. Betaine HCl, which is that stomach acid support. B complex vitamins, mineral complexes, fish oil and cod liver oil. Those are very healthy anti-inflammatory fats. Adrenal glandulars, that can really help if you're having an overreactive stress response.